So I told you this story of Tamar is a little challenging, may make us a little uncomfortable. And one thing that you might want to know about me is if I'm going to do something uncomfortable or something makes me uncomfortable, I'm going to make light of it. And so it came to me as I was preparing in this sermon, as often does, there's usually a song that will come to mind that reflects, whatever the struggle is for me. And this week it is the 1973 song by the Hughes Corporation, Rock the Boat. Do you remember that? Rock the boat, don't rock the boat, baby. Rock the boat, don't rock it all, or don't tip it all over. Okay, I will stop there. But you get the idea. So the main singer sings Rock the Boat, while there's other voices behind him saying, don't rock the boat, baby. Rock the boat, don't tip the boat over. This is the kind of the tension that we are going to hear in the story of Tamar and in the way that we are followers of Jesus. So keep that in mind as we hear the story of Tamar and Judah, rated PG. So first of all, the chapter that we're in, chapter 38, seems to be like dropped into the middle of the story of Joseph. Judah is one of Joseph's brothers, so it kind of makes sense that these come together. Remembering that these stories that we receive in the book of Genesis were oral stories. They were stories that were told around campfires and in family homes. They were passed from generation to generation before they were written down. And it seems that as these stories were put together, as the author or authors were contemplating the Joseph story, they remembered hearing a story about Judah and his sons and his daughter-in-law, and thought that it'd be great just to plop it in the middle of Joseph's story. Judah plays a part in this story, but we will focus on Tamar in just a moment. But the important thing to hear is that there's this dysfunction in this family of Jacob. Jacob is the father of Judah, Joseph, and many others. We remember the story of Joseph, right, where Joseph is one of the younger sons. Now, the societal norms of the day called that the older sons, especially the firstborn son, is the inheritor of all of the wealth and all of the power from the father. And Joseph, who is one of the younger brothers, comes along and understands he has this gift of dreaming and interpreting dreams. So we might remember that Joseph had a dream in which he interpreted that his brothers would bow down to him someday. And when he told his brothers about that, it caused a little problem, didn't it? His brothers were so enraged that they decided they would get rid of him. And as they took him out to kill him, one of the older brothers said, "This doesn't seem right because Dad's going to ask some questions." So they threw him in a well instead. Like that would solve the problem. And as we know, Joseph is rescued by some merchant men who were coming along, going to Egypt, and they take him on to Egypt. Well, then we get to this story of Judah, which had to have happened at least probably a couple decades later after Joseph was thrown into the well. But the continued family dysfunction, or a pattern of not being in good relationship with our family, carries on in Judah. So here's the story. This is fun. So Judah leaves Jacob's family, leaves Jacob's land, and goes into the hill country, and he marries a woman who's of Canaanite descendancy. So she is a foreigner. And Judah and his wife have 3 sons. The oldest is And in the tradition of the day, is found a wife by Judah, and he chooses Tamar, who is also Canaanite. Now, does something egregious to God. The text tells us that God strikes him down and he dies, and Tamar is left as a widow. In the societal norms of the day, the second son would then take Tamar as his wife and plant a seed in her so that she will bear a son for that eldest The thing is the second son didn't really want to plant his seed in her, and so he arranged to make that not happen. Okay? This is all in the text. I'm not making this up, okay? So this is egregious to the Lord as well, that the second son did not follow what was supposed to happen, and he is put to death. So the next son would be the husband of Tamar, but this third son is so young that he's not ready for marriage. And so Judah sends Tamar back to her father's house. Now, folks, in that day, a woman being sent back to her father's house would have been the most humiliating, most degrading thing to happen. It would have meant that she was broken, that she was less than nothing, and she would carry that with her for the rest of her life, or at least in this case, she was going to wait until that youngest son was old enough to marry. But you see, Judah had decided he was never going to give that third son to her in case that he would be struck down as well. And so secretly, he kept Tamar banished. So what does Tamar do with this? Well, she goes against the societal norms and kind of devises a plan to get herself back into right relationship, get her back into a status in which she will be taken care of. Judah, in the meantime, his wife dies and he goes through a time of mourning. And when that time of mourning is done, he takes off his clothes, which is an indication that he's ready to be a man again. And so Tamar decides that she will set herself up to be available to her father-in-law. She puts on a veil that will cover her face so she's not recognizable. She puts on some special clothing. So she is sitting at the side of the road, so he will take interest in her as he passes by. And he does. He asks to come to her. Wink, wink, come to her. And she says, well, what are you going to pay me for this? And he says, I will go get a kid from my flock and pay you. She said, well, I will need a pledge. And she asks him for his seal and his staff. So think of the seal as like a stamp. It's the identity of someone. If you were sending a letter and you needed to say that it's from you, you would stamp the clay or the melted wax so that everyone would know who that letter is from or whose. It's his identity, right? So she takes that, and when they're done, she hightails it back to her house, takes off these clothes. No one knows it was her, especially Judah. She does get pregnant, and as the town and everyone around her sees that she's pregnant, they all tell Judah, and Judah says, well, this woman has been sleeping around. My daughter-in-law has been sleeping around. She must be burned to death. Tamar comes out with the seal and the staff and offers it in front of everyone. And this is where we picked up the story in the scripture reading, where Judah recognized the very things that she had and proclaimed, she is more righteous than I am. That's quite a confession, isn't it? This is like a plot for a soap opera, right? I grew up watching The Young and the Restless. I feel like this is the plot line of Young and the Restless at least once or twice. So what does this story tell us? What are we to engage with? This seems like it shouldn't be a universal truth that if we find ourselves harmed or we see something that needs to change, that we should offer ourselves in some less than integrity, I guess, circumstance, that we should just, break the rules. But yet that is what this story is about. That sometimes in our world where there are systems of oppression and injustice, that we have to shake it up, rock the boat, break the rules. Tamar being named in Jesus' genealogy gives us this hint of what Jesus understood about this story, about his legacy, about how God was inviting him to be on a journey of faith and ministry. Jesus, hearing the story and making the Tamar's story his own, really informed him, and we see it in the ways in which Jesus interacted with people. For what the story of Tamar says to Jesus and to us is that sometimes our relationships need to be made right, and in order for them to be right, we need to break the rules. And so we hear about Jesus healing on the Sabbath day, a day in which no work is to be done because the relationship of the one to be healed was more important than the rules of the day. We hear of Jesus touching the leper, one who is deemed unclean, cursed by God, should not be touched by anyone. But Jesus will break the rules of the day, the expectations or the societal norms, in order to bring that person back into right relationship, not only with God, but with others in the community as well. Anytime Jesus came across those that were marginalized, those for whom the community or society deemed unworthy, Jesus was on their side. And I believe that it is the story of Tamar that helped him understand this. But what about for us today? We may think that this is a story about family dynamics, about how we take care of our relationships with our loved ones. But I would invite us to think about how we, as followers of Jesus, followers of the way of Jesus, that we too might see that there are times in which we break out of societal norms. You know, in this month of February, we have been celebrating love, like we did a couple of days ago. But February is also Black History Month. And so I'm aware that in the civil rights movement, there were folks willing to break the rules, to break those societal norms in order to bring about right relationship within the community. So I'm reminded this day on February 1st, 1960, that 4 students sat down at the lunch counter of the Woolworths in downtown Greensboro, where the official policy was to refuse service to anyone but whites. Denied service, these 4 young Black men refused to give up their seats. Their names, Ezell Blair Jr., David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Joseph McNeil. All 4 of these young men were students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College. They sat at that lunch counter every day until the rules changed. They said that they were inspired or had been spurred to action by the brutal murder in 1955 of the young Black boy Emmett Till. Their desire to see community be in right relationship also spurred others into action. But I'm also very aware of the women of the civil rights movement who made such an impact on our society. Maybe you know the name Claudette Colvin. 9 months before Rosa Parks wouldn't give up her seat on a bus, 15-year-old Claudette resisted giving up her seat for a white woman on a bus. She then gave testimony in a court case, which resulted in the change on the public transportation of Montgomery, Alabama, the change being that it became an integrated transportation system. Maybe you recall the name Ruby Bridges. Not only a Black girl, but a young girl, 6 years old, who had the courage, along with her mother, to enter into a school that had once been segregated in Louisiana. She went to school every day with U.S. Marshals escorting her, getting the taunts and abuse of the white people around her. Every day, Ruby went to school with no recess, no going to lunch, and with only one teacher willing to sit in a classroom with her. I also think of Dorothy Height, who was known as the godmother of the civil rights movement. She began her advocacy work in the 1930s and became an advisor to Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis. She had the knack of taking a political organization, a political atmosphere, and knowing how to work the system to further the rights of women, not only here in the United States, but worldwide as well. You see, our lives, our history is about people who are willing to rock the boat. We hear the stories of Jesus and how he would push against the systems of the day in order to make sure those who were on the outside, on the margins, were reunited or re-engaged in community. And this is our calling, my friends, as followers of the way. To know when to speak for the voiceless, to give power to the powerless, to bring about right relationship for God's purposes, in which all are welcomed in the kingdom. And so, let us rock the boat, and maybe even tip it over. Thanks be to God. Amen.